Chapter 1. Ganan. When Ganan awoke, rain was pouring down. He found himself splayed back against a fallen ash tree, still dying of thirst. He opened what he thought was his mouth, and let the gift of the rainbow serpent spatter into him. He tasted the burn of the salt they had forced into his throat, recalled the vomiting and the visions the poison brought on, saw the muzzle flash that put him out of his misery after he proved himself no longer of value in their quest. His brains stopped working before the pistol's sound reached his ears. Grey mush scattered clean out the backside of his melon before the vibration could register inside them and forward the information. So where was he now? The Skyland? No. The eternal dreaming? Maybe. Now the cycle simply continued. Was this his moment of resurrection? Perhaps, but it felt wrong. If he had been reborn, why did he have no memory of a new childhood? He could tell he was in a grown man's body and still recalled his former life in the bush, right up until the final brutal moments, but there seemed to be nothing in between to stitch the pair of lifetimes together. Lightning flashed, and he saw his hands lit up, bright as day, white as clouds in azure sky over the red clay of Willuna. It took a moment to land, and he unconsciously held his breath until the next burst of light confirmed it. His skin was indeed no longer the rich, dark brown it had been all of his days on earth. He was now the colour of some pasty white fella, and it scared him half to death. What crimes he'd possibly committed in life to deserve this curse in resurrection? He sat up, wrapped his arms round his knees, hugging himself tightly. The warm rain poured onto the back of his neck, running in rivulets down his shirt, soaking him to the bone. He squeezed himself and began rocking side to side, moaning through a torn-out throat, weeping at his fate. Thus, Harry fucking Moss's cold, empty, white corpse found itself once again amongst the animated. Perhaps an hour passed in this fashion. When Ganan did not awaken from the nightmare, he realized this must all be real. He searched his memory for any bridge to this moment and recalled something. A little boy throwing pebbles at him as he lay on the sand, still in the brown-skinned body that he knew so well, a fat white fella who tried to give him papers and pamphlets that meant nothing to his eyes. A kind Dinuragang who offered him cool water and told him stories of the old ways and the ancestors of Wangina and her creations. There was a fierce dingo held in check by the little boy. Then the world went black and tattered. And now this. He came out of his reverie and began to inspect himself. His feet were laced tightly into leather boots, his calves bound in muddy olive-green puttees over itchy woolen trousers. He tore it all off in a raging fury, stripping down entirely, the ultimate indignity ripping off Harry Moss's dirty underpants. He stood, let the rain wash over his nakedness, begging to be clean, glad for relief from the claustrophobia the white fella clothes wrapped him in. Ganan felt up along the front of his neck. He used his fingers to delicately inspect the dried, torn bite wounds. They were horrific to the touch. He could only imagine what they looked like. A wild dog? A crocodile, maybe? How could he possibly have survived the attack? His eyes adjusted to the darkness and he saw the silhouette of the white skin that was now covering him head to toe. Every time the lightning struck, he was again taken aback by the burst of pale, rain-slicked brightness that was his naked body. Another white flash, followed by a wicked crack of thunder, revealed a serrated bayonet beside him on the ground. Ganan bent down and picked it up. He examined its razor-honed edges. It was not a familiar weapon to him, but he understood its use and appreciated its potential. It took some doing, but he succeeded in sawing a tall, straight branch off the fallen ash tree that had served as his pillow. He carved the limb clean and then twisted the skinnier end through the bayonet's barrel ring. He wound one of Harry's long cloth puttees tightly around the grip and the shaft until the silver blade was firmly tied off in place. Ganan tested the weight of his jerry-rigged spear. It was not ideal, and he had no woomera with which to catapult it, but it felt similar enough to the spears he had wielded all of his life to comfort him, despite its awkward balance. He stood, stretched out the stiffness in his neck and shoulders. He hefted the spear, steadied himself, leaned back, and hurled it with all his strength. The spear flew straight and true, making a satisfying thunk as it embedded into the belly of an oak. Ganan padded over to it in his bare feet and twisted it free. The puttee had held tight. The spear would serve. For what? For what? He was unsure. But it was a relief that he would enter this nightmare suitably armed. He steadied himself for the unknown. Then, weapon in hand, he ventured into the dark lands intrepid, as prepared as he could be to face whatever this world brought his way. An hour on, they appeared out of the black rain. Ganan had let his concentration dull, allowing his mind to slip back in time while setting one foot before the other. So he was detached from the present moment when the band of men startled him into the now. He pulled to a stop, bringing the spear up fast, ready to tangle. He counted 4 men carrying a fifth. The fifth man's limp body was bound tight with rope. Another flash and roll of thunder. In the burst of light, Ganan saw that the inert man's skin was ebony black. For a fleeting moment he wondered if he might be kin. The buck-naked white man leading the party of 4 pushed his wet mop of hair back and smiled at Ganan. An odd sort of recognition passed between them. Ganan felt the sensation that the white men carrying the black fella were far more kin to him than their unconscious charge ever would be. Ganan slowly nodded back. Without a word, the party of men and their piece of baggage, the indomitable Corporal Isaiah Taylor, ventured onward, vanishing into the darkness, leaving Ganan again alone on his uncertain quest. The rain slackened after several hours. The storm clouds pushed west, revealing an alien sky. Ganan paused and stared up into the void. None of the stars were where they ought to be. He did not recognize the constellations that should have been there to guide him. The moon was risen, pendulous at its apex, huge and full, her pock-marked, beaten face crystal clear in the clean night sky, lighting up a dirty, broken world. Ganan lowered his gaze from her and pressed on, picking his way through the alien land, silent, hunting. He heard his prey before he saw him. Ganan tucked back in the brush and watched the man come stumbling out of the woods. The man took a knee, coughing, trying to manage his breath, hawking up a fat glob of mucus and spitting it onto the ground. Ganan could see the whites of the man's eyes rolling as he looked back the way he came, searching for a horror in the dark that did not present itself. Ganan circled around him silently. When he had him flanked, he caught the man's profile and froze. He knew this face, although it had aged more than a decade since he last saw it. Dr. Halstead. Ganan felt a flush of terror and then rage. Harry Moss's body trembled. Dr. Halstead stood up on shaking legs and stumbled onward. Ganan gripped his spear tight. He recalled his grandfather whispering, "Now, Ganan." Ganan had heeded his grandfather's voice then. Leaning back slowly, with the spear-loaded Woomera cocked. It transferred his weight and twisted his hips. The spear loosed from its launcher and ripped through the air, striking the big kangaroo in the shoulder, dropping it where it stood. His grandfather had whooped in joy at his only grandson's marksmanship. But there was no grandfather now to celebrate Ganan's strength and accuracy. Even so, a burst of pride flowed through him as the makeshift spear struck Dr. Halstead hard in the back and felled him with a cry. Ganan let out an inarticulate roar from his torn throat and raced through the bracken to the prostrate man. He found him face down, pinned like a butterfly by the bayonet. Ganan planted a foot on Halstead's neck and twisted his spear until it tore free. Halstead screamed out in pain and rolled over, contorted in a ball. Blood soaked his chest, where the bayonet point had passed completely through. Halstead saw Harry Moss standing over him. "Jesus! Harry! No, please, no!" Ganan lifted the spear for the kill stroke. He drove it down. It buried into the earth, inches from Halstead's face. Ganan followed it, landing a knee in Halstead's belly. He grabbed hold of Halstead's hair and yanked his head off the ground. This gubber, this white devil. He had him now, to do with as he pleased. There was no rush. Ganan would take his patient time with this one, just as all those white gubbers had taken their goddamn bloody time with him.